The night no one saw. The night that changed everything did not announce itself with flashing lights or headlines, and it did not feel important while it was happening. It arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary evening when the world seemed too busy to notice one person saving another. Years later, people would talk about courage and kindness as if they were loud, dramatic things, but that night proved the opposite. True courage often moves silently, and true kindness asks for nothing in return. Sandra Bullock had finished a long day that left her mind heavy and her body exhausted. She was not thinking about fame, cameras, or the weight of expectations that followed her wherever she went. She was thinking about ordinary things, about getting home safely, about the strange loneliness that sometimes appears even when life looks full from the outside. The city around her glowed with late-night energy, traffic flowing like a restless river, lights blinking and fading in patterns no one ever remembers the next day. It felt familiar, almost comforting, until one moment shifted the balance of everything. The street she chose that night was not dangerous by reputation, and that was part of the problem. It was easy to let one's guard down when a place felt routine. A sudden distraction, a sound that didn't belong, the brief sense that something was wrong before the mind could fully process it. Sandra felt it before she understood it, that tightening in the chest that warns you without explaining why. She slowed instinctively, and that hesitation may have saved her life. What happened next unfolded quickly but not chaotically. There was no dramatic struggle, no shouting crowd rushing in. Instead, there was a calm interruption, as if someone had quietly stepped between danger and consequence. A man appeared from the edge of the street, moving with purpose rather than panic, his presence firm enough to change the direction of events without escalating them. He spoke calmly, his voice steady, not raised, not demanding attention. That calm did more than force ever could have. Sandra barely registered his face in that moment. What she noticed instead was how the situation dissolved. The tension eased, the threat retreated, and the night resumed its ordinary rhythm as if nothing unusual had occurred. The man did not stay to explain himself. He did not wait for thanks or recognition. He simply ensured she was safe, nodded once as if to say that was enough, and disappeared into the same city lights from which he had come. It took several seconds for Sandra to realize she was standing alone again. Her heart raced, not from what had happened, but from how close she felt to something far worse. She looked around, searching instinctively for the man who had intervened, but he was gone. There were no witnesses stepping forward, no one asking if she was okay. Life had already moved on, and she was left holding a moment that felt unreal, as if it might vanish if she did not acknowledge it. For days afterward, she tried to understand what she felt. Gratitude, certainly, but also confusion. Who helps someone and leaves without a word? Who steps into danger only to fade back into anonymity? The memory followed her quietly, resurfacing at unexpected times, especially during moments when she felt overwhelmed by the noise of public life. It reminded her that the most meaningful moments are often unseen, and that not all heroes want to be known. Years passed, and the story remained unfinished, a loose thread in the back of her mind. Sandra never spoke publicly about it, not because it was unimportant, but because it felt private, sacred in a way that publicity would diminish. She carried it as a reminder of something simple yet profound. That kindness exists even when it goes unnoticed, and that someone somewhere once chose to help without expecting anything back. During those same years, Keanu Reeves lived his life with the same quiet consistency that defined him. He moved through the world without seeking attention, guided by a personal code shaped by loss, humility, and an understanding that life owes no explanations. He believed in doing good quietly, in letting actions speak once and then fade. To him, kindness was not a performance, it was a responsibility. There were moments he thought about that night, though he never framed it as something extraordinary. To Keanu, it was simply the right thing to do at the time. He remembered the street, the way tension hung in the air, the brief fear in a stranger's eyes that mirrored something he recognized deeply. He remembered making a choice, stepping forward because walking away would have stayed with him far longer than any risk involved in helping. What he did not know and would not know for many years was who that woman truly was or how deeply that moment would echo through her life. He did not connect it to future headlines or shared spaces. The city is vast, and paths cross and separate without explanation. He assumed, as most people do, that the moment ended when he walked away. Life continued to shape both of them in ways that seemed unrelated, but were quietly connected by that single act. Sandra's understanding of safety, trust, and human goodness shifted subtly. She became more attentive to small gestures, more aware of quiet strength in others. Keanu continued to live with the same unspoken philosophy. unaware that his actions had left a permanent mark on someone who would one day stand beside him in an entirely different context. The irony of their eventual reconnection was that it did not begin with recognition. When their professional paths later aligned, there was no immediate spark of memory, no dramatic realization. They worked together with respect and ease, both appreciating the other's professionalism and depth without understanding the history that bound them. Sometimes the most important connections are invisible even to the people living inside them. Yet something subtle lingered. Sandra felt a sense of familiarity around Keanu that she could not explain, a calm that echoed something from long ago. Keanu, in turn, felt a quiet respect for Sandra that went beyond collaboration, though he could not place its origin. Neither of them forced the question. Life had taught them both that not every feeling needs immediate answers. As the years unfolded, the world saw them through the lens of entertainment and public narrative, but beneath that surface, something deeper was at work. A story that began in silence was slowly moving toward understanding, guided by patience rather than urgency. The truth, when it finally surfaced, would not arrive with drama or spectacle. It would come gently, the way all meaningful truths do, asking only to be recognized. Episode 1 ends not with revelation, but with intention. It is the foundation of a story about unseen choices, about how a single moment of courage can ripple through time without either person realizing it. It reminds us that the human spirit is not measured by applause, but by what we choose to do when no one is watching. In the parts that follow, the quiet connection between Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves will slowly come into focus, revealing not just what happened that night, but why it mattered so deeply, and how understanding it would eventually change them both. The years that followed silence. Time has a way of softening sharp memories without erasing them, and for Sandra Bullock, the years after that quiet night became a lesson in how deeply one unseen moment can shape a life. She did not wake every morning thinking about the stranger who stepped in and vanished, yet his presence lingered in subtle ways, influencing how she moved through the world, how she listened to people, and how she measured the meaning of safety and trust. The experience did not turn into fear. Instead, it transformed into awareness. She became more observant of small human interactions, more conscious of how fragile ordinary moments truly are, and more appreciative of kindness that expects no recognition. Her career continued to rise, carrying her across cities, red carpets, and crowded rooms where everyone seemed to want something from her. Applause, interviews, flashing cameras, and endless conversations filled her days, yet there were moments when she felt strangely alone amid the noise. During those moments, her thoughts sometimes returned to that night, not as a source of anxiety, but as proof that genuine humanity exists beyond fame, beyond status, beyond the world she often found herself trapped inside. It reminded her that the most meaningful acts are often performed by people who never make headlines. Sandra never shared the story publicly, not because she feared disbelief, but because she feared reducing it to entertainment. Some experiences lose their power when they are spoken too often or too casually. This one felt personal, almost sacred. It belonged to a version of herself that existed outside scripts and expectations, a reminder of vulnerability and grace intersecting in a single instant. In her quieter moments, she wondered who that man was, whether he was safe, and whether he ever thought about what he had done. The questions lingered without urgency, content to remain unanswered. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves continued walking his own path, guided by values shaped long before that night. His life had taught him that loss can arrive without warning, and that compassion is not something to postpone. For him, stepping in when someone needed help was not heroic, it was necessary. He did not attach meaning to the act beyond the immediate responsibility of doing what felt right. The city swallowed the moment, and he allowed it to fade, trusting that the woman he helped would move forward unharmed. As years passed, Keanu's reputation grew not just for his work, but for the quiet integrity that followed him wherever he went. People spoke about his kindness, his humility, his way of treating others with genuine respect, but he rarely engaged with those narratives. Praise made him uncomfortable, not out of false modesty, but because he believed goodness loses something when it becomes performative. He lived simply, avoided unnecessary attention, and remained grounded in the belief that actions matter more than stories told about them. When fate eventually placed Sandra and Keanu in the same professional space, it did so without ceremony. There was no dramatic convergence, no sudden realization that history connected them. They interacted as colleagues, professionals brought together by circumstance rather than destiny, or so it seemed. Their conversations were easy, marked by mutual respect and an unspoken understanding that did not need explanation. Something about their interactions felt natural, as if they shared a rhythm neither could fully explain. Sandra noticed that Keanu listened differently than most people. He did not interrupt or rush to fill silence. He gave space for thoughts to unfold, for emotions to exist without being fixed or judged. That quality resonated with her deeply, though she did not know why. Being around him felt grounding, almost familiar in a way that surprised her. It reminded her of the calm that had diffused few years ago on a quiet street, though the connection remained just beyond conscious recognition. Keanu, on the other hand, felt a sense of ease around Sandra that he rarely experienced in high-pressure environments. She carried herself with strength, yet there was an openness about her that made conversation feel genuine rather than rehearsed. He admired her resilience, her humor, and the way she navigated challenges without losing empathy. Still, he did not question the feeling too deeply. Life had taught him that some connections do not require immediate explanation. Their paths crossed repeatedly, and with each interaction, a subtle bond formed, built not on grand gestures, but on shared respect and quiet understanding. They supported each other professionally, offered encouragement during difficult moments, and celebrated successes without competition or ego. To outsiders, it looked like a strong working relationship, nothing more. To them, it felt deeper, though neither could articulate why. At times, Sandra felt an inexplicable pull to trust Keanu, to open up about fears and doubts she rarely shared. She spoke about the pressures of public life, about moments of self-doubt, about the challenge of remaining authentic in a world that constantly demands performance. Keanu listened without judgment, offering thoughtful reflections rather than solutions. His presence felt steady, like an anchor in shifting waters. Keanu, too, found himself sharing parts of his inner world with Sandra, speaking about loss, about resilience, about the importance of kindness in a world that often rewards indifference. These conversations were not dramatic or emotional in a visible way, but they carried weight. They were the kind of exchanges that leave you feeling lighter afterward, understood without needing to explain every detail. Still, the truth remained hidden, waiting patiently. Neither of them realized that their bond was rooted in a moment neither had fully processed. The past hovered quietly between them, shaping their connection without revealing itself. It was as if life was allowing the relationship to grow strong enough to hold the truth before unveiling it. Part 2 is about the long echo of a single act and the way unseen connections influence our lives without demanding attention. It shows how kindness does not end when a moment passes, but continues to shape choices, relationships, and perspectives over time. As Sandra and Keanu's lives slowly intertwined, the story moved closer to understanding, guided not by coincidence, but by the quiet persistence of empathy and human connection. The revelation would come later, not as a shock, but as a gentle awakening to something that had been there all along. The moment memory began to stir. There comes a point in every untold story when the past begins to knock gently on the present, not demanding attention, but asking to be acknowledged. For Sandra Bullock, that moment arrived quietly, without warning, during a time when life felt unusually reflective. She was not searching for answers, nor was she trying to revisit old memories, yet something inside her began to shift, as if a long-dormant part of her mind had decided it was time to speak again. It was not dramatic or overwhelming, but persistent, like a familiar melody she could almost recognize but not quite name. It started with small details. The way Keanu Reeves paused before stepping into a room, scanning instinctively rather than casually. The way he positioned himself during crowded events, subtly attentive to who was around him, always aware of space and movement. These were not things most people noticed, but Sandra did because they echoed something buried deep in her memory. She had seen this calm vigilance before, years ago, on a street she rarely allowed herself to think about. At first, she dismissed the feeling as coincidence. After all, many people share similar mannerisms, and memory is a fragile thing, easily shaped by emotion and imagination. Still, the sense of familiarity refused to fade. It followed her into conversations, into moments of silence when Keanu sat across from her, listening with that same steady focus that made her feel inexplicably safe. The feeling was not romantic, not nostalgic, but deeply human, as if her instincts were recognizing something her conscious mind had not yet caught up with. Around the same time, Sandra found herself thinking more often about the concept of disappearance, about people who step into our lives briefly and leave behind an impact far greater than their presence suggests. She reflected on how society celebrates visibility, applause, and recognition, while overlooking the quiet acts that shape lives in lasting ways. These thoughts were not prompted by any single event. They emerged naturally, woven into her reflections on kindness, resilience, and the unseen bonds that connect people. Keanu, too, began experiencing moments of subtle unease, though he would not have described them that way. There were instances when Sandra's voice or expression stirred something in him, a faint echo of a memory he had long since filed away. He did not immediately connect it to anything concrete. His life had been filled with countless interactions, faces blending together across years and cities. Still, there were moments when her presence triggered a sense of recognition that felt deeper than familiarity but shallower than certainty. He brushed these thoughts aside, attributing them to shared experiences and professional closeness. Keanu was not someone who chased explanations unnecessarily. He believed that clarity arrives when it is meant to, and forcing meaning onto feelings often distorts them. Instead, he remained present, offering the same quiet respect and attentiveness he always had, unaware that the past was slowly aligning itself with the present. The turning point came during an unguarded conversation, one that neither of them expected to carry weight. They were speaking about fear, not the dramatic kind portrayed on screens, but the quiet fears that surface in everyday life. Sandra spoke carefully, choosing her words with intention, describing a time long ago when she realized how quickly normalcy can fracture. She did not share details, only the emotional truth of the experience, the sudden awareness of vulnerability, and the relief that followed unexpected kindness. As she spoke, Keanu listened, his expression unchanged, yet something inside him tightened. Her words brushed against a memory he had not revisited in years, a night he had categorized as insignificant, resolved, complete. He remembered the tension, the decision to step forward, the relief of knowing someone would be okay. The emotional tone of her story felt strangely aligned with his own unspoken recollection, though he still did not make the connection explicitly. Sandra noticed the shift in him, subtle but undeniable. His silence carried weight, not discomfort, but depth. For a brief moment their eyes met and something passed between them that neither could name. It was not recognition yet, but proximity to it, like standing at the edge of a realization without stepping fully into it. The conversation moved on, but the air between them felt different afterward, charged with unspoken understanding. That night, Sandra found herself unable to sleep easily. Her thoughts circled around the conversation, replaying fragments of memory she had long kept dormant. The streetlights outside her window reminded her of city nights, of shadows and stillness, of the calm voice that had once broken through fear. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder not just who that man was, but why the memory felt so close now. Keanu, too, lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, his mind unusually active. He revisited moments he rarely examined, asking himself questions he had never felt the need to answer. Why did Sandra's words resonate so deeply? Why did the feeling of familiarity refuse to dissipate? He did not jump to conclusions, but he did something rare for him. He allowed curiosity to linger. In the days that followed, their interactions remained professional, calm, and respectful, yet something subtle had shifted. There was a deeper attentiveness, a shared awareness that something meaningful was unfolding beneath the surface. They spoke with the same ease as before, but now each pause carried potential, each shared silence felt heavier with possibility. Part 3 is about the awakening of memory, about the moment when the past begins to press gently against the present, asking to be seen. It explores how truth does not always arrive fully formed, but reveals itself gradually, through emotion, intuition, and quiet recognition. As Sandra and Keanu moved closer to understanding the connection between them, they stood on the edge of a revelation that would not only explain the past, but redefine the meaning of the bond they had unknowingly built. When truth began to find its voice. There are moments in life when truth does not arrive suddenly, but instead gathers courage alongside the people meant to receive it. For Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, that moment unfolded slowly, shaped by timing rather than force, by readiness rather than curiosity. The stirring memories from before did not fade. Instead, they grew clearer, settling into place like puzzle pieces finally willing to be seen. Neither of them spoke about it directly at first, yet both felt the same quiet certainty that something important was approaching. Sandra began to reflect more deeply on the pattern she saw in Keanu's actions, not just in how he treated her, but in how he moved through the world. She noticed the way he showed kindness without witnesses, the way he checked in on people others overlooked, the way he deflected praise and redirected attention toward collective effort rather than individual credit. These were not habits learned for cameras or reputation. They were deeply ingrained, practiced long before anyone was watching. Slowly, a thought formed that she resisted at first, not because it frightened her, but because it felt almost too precise to be coincidence. She remembered the calm voice from that night years ago, the absence of panic, the quiet authority that dissolved danger instead of escalating it. She remembered how safe she felt without knowing why, how the man had vanished as if visibility itself was something he avoided. The parallels were impossible to ignore now. Still, Sandra did not rush toward confrontation or confirmation. She respected the delicacy of memory and understood that some truths must be approached gently, especially when they involve another person's private choices. Keanu, meanwhile, found himself revisiting that night more frequently, not as a heroic moment, but as a question left unanswered. Sandra's presence had reopened a door he had long closed, not because it was painful, but because it felt complete at the time. Now, the emotional familiarity he felt around her began to make sense in a way that unsettled him slightly, not with fear, but with humility. The idea that a small, forgotten act could ripple forward into his present life forced him to reconsider how interconnected moments truly are. He recalled the woman's posture, her hesitation, the way fear briefly surfaced before relief took over. He remembered thinking only of ensuring she would walk away safely, nothing more. The realization that Sandra might be that same person did not arrive as certainty, but as a growing alignment of memories and emotions. Keanu was not someone who rushed toward self-importance, and the idea that he might have played a pivotal role in someone else's life made him uncomfortable. He did not want that act to define him, nor did he want it to redefine their current relationship. The tension between recognition and restraint created a quiet space between them, not awkward but thoughtful. They both sensed that speaking too soon could fracture something delicate, something built on mutual respect and unspoken trust. Instead of forcing the truth, they allowed it room to breathe. Conversations grew more reflective, less surface level, touching on themes of fate, timing, and the unseen forces that guide human connection. One evening, during a conversation that unfolded without planning, Sandra spoke about gratitude, not directed at anyone in particular, but as a concept that shapes how she sees the world. She talked about how one person's kindness can become a compass for another, how it can restore faith at moments when fear threatens to take hold. Her words were calm, measured, yet deeply personal. She did not describe the event, but she described its impact, the way it changed how she approached life. Keanu listened, his attention unwavering. He felt the weight of her words settle into him, and for the first time he understood that the story he had dismissed as a passing moment might have lived on far beyond that night. He realized that the act had not ended when he walked away. It had continued, shaping choices, perspectives, and resilience in ways he could never have predicted. The humility of that realization stayed with him, grounding rather than elevating him. After that conversation, silence carried a new kind of honesty. They did not avoid each other, nor did they become overly attentive. Instead, there was a shared understanding that something meaningful existed between them, something rooted not in coincidence, but in shared humanity. Sandra felt a growing sense of peace, not because she had answers, but because she trusted that the truth, when spoken, would be met with the same calm respect that had defined every interaction between them. Keanu grappled with a quiet decision. He wondered whether acknowledging the connection would honor the moment or disrupt the balance they had built. He feared that naming it might shift the focus from shared respect to personal credit, something he deeply resisted. Yet he also understood that silence, if prolonged, could deny Sandra the closure she deserved. The choice weighed on him, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Part 4 is about restraint, about the courage required not to speak immediately, and the wisdom to wait until truth can be received without harm. It reflects the reality that some revelations require emotional readiness, not urgency. As Sandra and Keanu stood closer than ever to understanding what connected them, they demonstrated that patience itself is an act of kindness, and that the human spirit often reveals its deepest truths not through force, but through trust. The revelation that changed nothing and everything. The truth did not arrive like a confession or a dramatic unveiling, and when it finally surfaced, it did so with the same quiet dignity that had defined it from the beginning. Sandra Bullock did not demand answers, and Keanu Reeves did not prepare a speech. Instead, the moment emerged naturally, shaped by trust that had already proven itself strong enough to hold whatever came next. It happened during a conversation that wandered into reflection without intention, the kind of exchange that grows from comfort rather than necessity, when words feel less like tools and more like companions. Sandra spoke about the idea of closure, not as something that resolves pain, but as something that completes understanding. She reflected on how some moments remain unfinished not because they are unresolved, but because they are waiting for the right context. Her voice was steady, thoughtful, free of expectation. She did not accuse the past of absence, nor did she demand explanations. She simply acknowledged that certain acts of kindness leave marks that last longer than memory alone. Keanu felt the invitation beneath her words, gentle and respectful. He understood then that silence, which once felt appropriate, had reached its natural end. The truth did not need embellishment or justification. It only needed honesty delivered with humility. He took a moment not to prepare himself, but to ensure that what he said would honor the spirit of that night rather than elevate it. He spoke simply, describing a moment from years ago when he saw someone in need and stepped forward without thinking beyond the immediate necessity. He did not frame it as bravery or sacrifice. He described it as instinct, as the choice anyone could make when empathy outweighs hesitation. He did not initially name the person, allowing the story to exist without ownership. As he spoke, Sandra listened intently, her expression calm but deeply focused. The details aligned too precisely to ignore, not as a shock, but as a recognition that felt almost peaceful. When Keanu finally acknowledged that the woman he helped might have been her, he did not seek confirmation. He left space for her truth to meet his without pressure. Sandra felt a quiet stillness settle over her, not disbelief or overwhelm, but understanding. The years of unanswered questions did not rush back with urgency. Instead, they gently resolved themselves like a knot loosening on its own. She did not respond immediately, not because she doubted him, but because she wanted to honor the weight of the moment. When she did speak, her gratitude was not loud or emotional. It was sincere, grounded, and deeply human. She thanked him not just for what he did, but for how he did it, for leaving without expectation, for allowing the act to remain pure. She shared how that moment had shaped her perception of safety and kindness, how it reminded her that humanity can appear without warning and leave without applause. Her words carried appreciation without placing him on a pedestal, something Keanu felt deeply grateful for. What followed was not a transformation of their relationship, but a deepening of it. The revelation did not redefine who they were to each other. It clarified what had already existed. Their respect for one another grew not from the act itself, but from the shared understanding of its meaning. They recognized that the connection they had built over time was not dependent on that night, but enriched by it. Keanu expressed relief, not because the truth was finally spoken, but because it had been received with grace. He shared that he never wanted the act to become a defining feature of how others saw him, and Sandra understood completely. She assured him that the value of what he did was not in recognition, but in its lasting impact, something that did not require public acknowledgement to remain real. They sat with the truth without rushing to conclusions or dramatic declarations. There was no sense of destiny or inevitability, only appreciation for how life weaves connections quietly, patiently, and with surprising precision. The moment affirmed something both had long believed, that kindness does not bind people through obligation, but through shared respect. Part 5 is about revelation without spectacle, about how truth, when delivered with humility, does not disrupt balance but restores it. It shows that understanding does not always demand change. Sometimes it simply deepens what already exists. For Sandra and Keanu, the night that once stood alone in memory finally found its place in the present, not as a defining chapter, but as a meaningful thread woven into a much larger story of empathy, resilience, and quiet human connection. Why he vanished and what remained. Understanding did not end the story, it completed it. After the truth found its voice, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves did not rush to define what it meant or how it should change anything. Instead, they allowed the meaning to settle naturally, like sunlight filling a room without rearranging the furniture. The question that lingered was not what happened that night, because that was finally clear, but why it happened the way it did, and why the man who helped had chosen to disappear. The answer to that question would not arrive as a justification, but as a reflection of the values that shaped a life. Keanu spoke about disappearance not as an absence, but as a choice rooted in respect. He explained that he had learned early on that help becomes complicated when it seeks recognition, that kindness loses its purity the moment it expects something in return. For him, leaving was not about secrecy or humility as performance. It was about allowing the person he helped to reclaim their own strength without becoming indebted to anyone else. He believed that safety restored should feel complete, not conditional, and that remaining present afterward could unintentionally shift the focus away from healing and toward obligation. Sandra listened with a depth that came from lived experience. She understood immediately what he meant, because she remembered how important it had been, in the days following that night, to feel whole again rather than rescued. The absence of the man who helped her had allowed the moment to stand on its own, unburdened by expectation or explanation. It had given her space to process fear without attaching it to another person's identity, to rebuild confidence without leaning on gratitude as a crutch. She shared how that disappearance had taught her something profound about resilience. It reminded her that strength can be restored quietly, that not all healing needs a witness, and that sometimes the greatest gift is the freedom to move forward without being defined by what almost happened. In that sense, Keanu's decision to vanish had not taken anything away from her. It had given her ownership of her own survival. The conversation did not romanticize the act or elevate it beyond what it was. Instead, it honored the principle behind it. They spoke about how society often confuses visibility with value, how people are encouraged to document and display goodness rather than practice it privately. Keanu reflected on how easily attention can distort intention, and Sandra agreed, noting how rare it is to encounter kindness that asks for nothing, especially in a world built on exchange. What remained after that conversation was not a sense of debt or destiny, but clarity. They understood that their connection was not defined by one night, but enriched by it. The respect they shared deepened, grounded now in a shared philosophy about how to exist in the world with integrity. They did not feel closer because of the act itself, but because of the values it revealed and the way those values had quietly guided both of their lives. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its familiar rhythm, yet something subtle had changed. Their conversations carried an added layer of honesty, a mutual awareness that some things do not need to be said again to be understood. They supported each other with the same consistency as before, but now with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that their bond had been tested by truth and held steady. Sandra found herself thinking less about the night itself and more about what it represented. It became a symbol of faith in humanity rather than a memory of fear. She carried it forward as a reminder that compassion can exist without attachment, and that the world is shaped as much by unseen choices as by celebrated ones. The story no longer felt unfinished. It felt complete, resting comfortably within her as a source of calm rather than curiosity. Keanu, too, felt a sense of resolution, not because he needed validation, but because the act had finally found its place in the larger narrative of his life. It reaffirmed his belief that the right thing to do is often the simplest, and that doing it quietly does not diminish its impact. He felt grateful that the truth had emerged gently, without spectacle, honoring the spirit in which the choice had been made. The reason he vanished all those years ago was not mystery or modesty alone. It was trust. Trust that kindness would be enough, that the moment would serve its purpose without his presence lingering over it. Years later, that trust proved justified. What remained was not a debt to be repaid, but a shared understanding that strengthened two lives without binding them. Part 6 closes the story not with an ending, but with a lesson that extends beyond its characters. It reminds us that the resilience of the human spirit is often nurtured by quiet acts, that empathy does not need an audience, and that sometimes the most powerful choice is to help and then step back, allowing life to continue uninterrupted. In that space of quiet integrity, connection endures not because it demands attention, but because it was built on respect, patience, and the enduring power of kindness.